forgive our brief promotional video and my pause because my screen has just gone white. But we're very excited to launch our new and much delayed event, BioFuture, right here in Manhattan. And we hope you will join us to reimagine the future of healthcare. So good morning, everybody. Good morning from Manhattan, and thank you all for joining us, wherever you may be located. My name is Sarah Jane Demy of Demy-Colton, and on behalf of the Demy-Colton team, our sponsors and supporters, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 25th installment of the Demy-Colton Virtual Salon Series, Ophthalmic Drug Delivery, Eye on Innovation. We welcome all past participants, and of course, we welcome those of you who are joining us for the very first time. Demy-Colton's mission is all about convening healthcare industry leaders from multiple disciplines to catalyze change. And COVID forced us to rethink how we would execute our mission during a time of lockdown, which is when we decided to launch the Demy-Colton Virtual Salon Series. It is one of those silver lining events. We know that the Demy-Colton Virtual Salon Series will be here to stay. And we encourage you to check our website for any upcoming salons that we're going to do. We will have a pause in August, but then we will resume again in September. As I mentioned earlier, we are launching a new conference here in New York City called BioFuture. It will take place October 5 and 6, and it will take place at CURE, Deerfield Partners' new vertical innovation park space, if you will, on Park Avenue South, right in the middle of Manhattan. So it's really kind of exciting. So please do think about joining us. I encourage you to do so. We want to see more people in person. Before we get underway, I do want to thank all of our salon sponsors and BioFuture's founding sponsors for supporting us during this whole time. And now to some housekeeping notes before we begin. The format of today's salon will be a 50 to 55-minute discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A period that will last about 15 minutes. You can submit your questions in the Ask a Question pane, which is below your screen, and we will address as many as possible. And of course, I do encourage all of you to make your questions as succinct as possible. Please note, everyone, that the salon is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing later today. Any additional materials provided by our panelists will be found on the Event Resources tab, and please feel free to download them at your convenience. And now to today's salon, Ophthalmic Drug Delivery, Eye on Innovation. Our moderator is Laura Randa. Laura is Chief Commercial Officer, Curia Digital Therapeutics. And our panelists include Carrie Brady, President and CEO, Ocular Therapeutics, Jeff Cleland, Chairman, CEO, President, and Co-founder of Ashbaka Therapeutics, Lloyd Diamond, President and CEO of Pixium Vision, and Mina Such, President and CEO, Ocular Pharma. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the virtual podium over to Laura. Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. We're in for a wonderful conversation today. As we've noted, private equity and VC firms have been looking for new healthcare markets with growing platforms to generate return for investors. Recently, ophthalmology has become a great focal point for private equity and VC firms. The combination of a fragmented market, a high margin industry, increasing demand, and the majority of cash and private pay procedures are all key factors that have created a fantastic opportunity for premium returns on investment in this industry. You're going to hear an amazing amount of innovation today, and let's get started with the conversation. I'm going to ask each of our presenters today, or panelists, to describe their company's technology for the group so you can hear all the amazing innovation being done by these four fantastic panelists today. Lloyd, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me, Laura?
Absolutely. Over to
All right,
you.
great. Thanks for having me. So Pixium Vision is a company that's developed a brain-machine interface technology in the form of a retinal implant that is used to restore vision for patients that have lost central visual acuity due to the dry form of age-related macular degeneration. And we incorporate several different types of technology. We have an implant that communicates with a virtual reality glasses and a computer processor that actually will simplify images captured by the glasses that are then transmitted to the implant. And then the implant then uses the residual functioning visual network to actually give visual perception to patients.
Thank you. We'll certainly want to dig into lots of your technology and your strategies and shortly as we discuss things today. Carrie, could you introduce your company as well?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Carrie Brady, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Ocular Therapeutics. We're a private Boston-based biopharma focused on developing innovative drugs for ophthalmic diseases for which the current standard of care does not prevent or control progression of the disease. We're a highly experienced drug development and ophthalmology team. Our board chair is Brent Saunders, and our scientific advisory board includes recognized leaders in the retina field. And our initial therapeutic, OTT-166, is ready to enter phase 2 and will enable intervention earlier in diabetic retinopathy, which is a chronic progressive disease that affects about a third of diabetics and is one of the leading causes of vision loss. 166 is a small, novel molecule, which is a potent and selective integrin inhibitor, and it's been engineered to have the optimum balance of the physicochemical properties to enable it to travel through the outer layers of the eye to reach the retina after eye drop administration. And by inhibiting these key integrins, OTT-166 is able to regulate responses to multiple growth factors, including VEGF, known to contribute to diabetic retinopathy and other diseases. In early clinical studies in patients with diabetic retinal disease, OTT-166 eye drops have demonstrated evidence of safety, tolerability, and most importantly, biological activity. At Ocular, our goal is to bring transformative treatments to clinicians and patients who are currently consigned to watch and wait as the standard of care as their disease progresses until the extent of damage and vision loss reaches a stage where medically intensive and invasive therapies such as intravitreal injection, laser, or surgery are required. So by providing treatment earlier with non-invasive treatment such as OTT-166 will enable to watch and treat rather than watch and wait. Thank you, Lauren.
Wow, wonderful. Look forward to more discussions as we progress today. Jeff, can you share all the wonderful things you're doing in innovation at your company?
Sure. Thanks, Laura, and thanks for the opportunity to be here and present today. Our company is founded by several scientists at Johns Hopkins University, and what they've done is really discovered something very novel. It's called a hydroxyl dendrimer technology. And what's unique about these hydroxyl dendrimers is they're actually able to find reactive inflammatory cells anywhere in the body without a targeting ligand. And so we've been able to show not only in preclinical models, over 30 different models in 7 species, but now in humans, that we can actually target reactive inflammatory cells and then conjugate chemically to these hydroxyl dendrimers drugs to treat different diseases, inflammatory diseases. We just announced positive phase 2 data in severe COVID-19 patients showing a dramatic improvement in survival and the ability to actually knock down neurological biomarkers of disease. In ophthalmology, we're actually focused on taking a compound that traditionally has been very toxic, but by chemically coupling it to our platform technology, we can now give it orally or inject through subcutaneous administration without any toxicity. And so now we can actually treat the back of the eye disease without having to go directly into the eye, either through drops or through an injection. We can now give it either orally or subcutaneously. And we're excited to take that program forward next year into the clinic.
Wonderful. Thank you. We also look forward to learning a little bit more as the conversation goes today. And Mina, lots of innovation happening at your company. Can you share what's going on?
Of course. And I also want to add my thanks to the organizers at Demy-Colton for having this group get together to talk about ophthalmology and all the innovation we're all doing. So Occufire is 3 years old. I founded it then, and we are now public. So I'll make some forward-looking statements and guide you to our risk factors. We trade as OCUP on the NASDAQ, and we are unique in being both a front and a back of the eye ophthalmic story. We have a drug for the front called Nixol, which is phentolamine mesylate, which is an alpha-1 inhibitor, and essentially works on your iris dilator muscle to reduce your pupil size by about 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters. We'd like to say a moderate miotic. We're the only company with a drug focused on that muscle versus your other muscle that controls your pupil, which is in the cholinergic agonist class, the sphincter muscle. And we're looking at 3 indications. We're looking at reversal of dilation when you go in for those annual exams and you're looking for ways to which to reduce that pupil faster. 2, we're looking at night vision, halos and glares due to aberrations, for example, caused by LASIK or other surgical procedures or dry eye aging. And 3rd, and most importantly, and maybe most ambitiously, presbyopia, to offer an alternative to reading glasses. I'd like to report that these programs at Nixol are all either phase 3 or phase 2, and we just reported positive data for presbyopia a few weeks back, as well as presented it in the recent weeks at the conferences that just occurred in ophthalmology for refractive and cataract surgeries. And in addition, we had positive phase 3 data for our reversal of mydriasis or dilation as well earlier this year. So we've had a fun and productive first 6 months for the front of the eye. And just a comment on the back of the eye, which my colleagues, both Jeff and Carrie, did a great job talking about some of the unmet needs for retina. We have an oral tablet called APX 3030, which has also been in many trials over actually multiple decades, that can be both is an anti-VEGF and an anti-inflammatory mechanism. And it hits a novel target called redox effector factor 1, which is a transcription factor regulator and works upstream of HIF-1 alpha on the VEGF pathway and NF-kappa B, as well as TNF alpha and the cytokines, IL-6, et cetera, on the inflammatory pathway. So very unique delivery as well as mechanism. And we're looking at diabetic retinopathy initially, and then looking at all the other retinal diseases, wet AMD, GA, et cetera, as an adjunctive therapy. So that is in phase 2. And again, we're excited to be here and talk with the panel about innovation.
Thank you. Wow. We have an amazing group. I think let's dig into learning more about the technology and the science. So I'm going to ask the first question to Jeff. Jeff, retinal disease has a heavy treatment burden for patients and physicians due to the frequent, injections into the eye. What technology and products might address this treatment burden to the patients and also help us expand the marketplace?
Sure, absolutely, Laura. I think you're right. In terms of looking at the market, it's really a difficult treatment right now. Not only are patients burdened by this disease, especially wet AMD, but physicians as well. They can't treat enough patients fast enough because there's so much more patient population now than there was 10 or 15 years ago. And so different approaches that are being taken span the gauntlet of drug delivery, everything from an implant, which, as you probably know, Roche is developing with Genentech, the implant approach, which is putting a reservoir in the eye and refilling that reservoir. There's depot technologies where people have tried to develop depots, such as what Ascendis is doing with some of their platform technology. And then there's other approaches where the people are trying to take different routes of administration, whether that's through topical drops, oral administration, systemic delivery, like what we're attempting to do. And then I think the other end of the spectrum is really around gene therapy, where people are now trying to go in and see if we can really increase that time between injections to potentially years. And so I think there's really a new frontier being developed here to get away from that frequent intravitreal injection or needle in the eye, so that patients can really have less treatment burden and physicians can treat more patients.
Wow. The new frontier, certainly something needed as more and more of us are identifying with some of these, these diseases. Mina, you mentioned earlier about small molecules. What's your opinion on developing the small molecule for VEGF inhibitors for wet AMD? Is it viable? Will it be used in clinical practice?
Yeah, so commenting first on the field, there have been maybe a few recent setbacks, I think, with using a small molecule anti-VEGF inhibitor, I think, one of the challenges has always been safety, whether on visual acuity or systemic signals. But I think the innovation will continue. I think there's some more TKIs that are in development. And again, all options and opportunities for patients is welcome. I would highlight that we took a different approach at Ocuphire. So we also do have a small molecule. APX3330 is a small molecule, but again, it has a novel target called REF1, this transcription factor regulator, and it works upstream of known targets, actually from the cancer field on the on the HIF1 alpha and the anti-VEGF pathway and the angiogenesis pathway, such as Avastin, which is obviously the basis for Eylea and Lucentis' programs, and a few others as well. But it also works on the anti-inflammatory pathway because it actually stops the activation also of NF-kappa B and some of the downstream proteins as well, which are very well known in the inflammatory pathway, which again is currently treated by steroid injections for retinal disease. And we're excited that, again, we have, and may not have mentioned this, but we have 10 trials done by ASI that were in the inflammatory liver area. So we've actually got hundreds of patients of safety. It was 5 phase 1s and 5 phase 2, and we're now starting a phase 2. So the systemic safety we feel very comfortable with the data to date, with really no signals on organ toxicities, anything else meaningful. And I think that's been the key to delivery if you're going to go systemic, is to be able to show that safety profile. That's always the most common question we got from KOLs as they began to get to know our program and then advised us over the last year to get our trial designed and up and running. So again, I think there are other targets that will also be looked at besides just anti-VEGF, which I think will either be only anti-inflammatory targets or other angiogenesis targets, or in our case, both. And again, delivered in many different ways, of which we've chosen the oral way. And again, I think the oral route, for those that may not know, is actually not novel. So there are nutraceuticals today for the retina that you can buy over the counter, sold by some of the large players. It's really finding a safe and efficacious profile and a mechanism that's getting at the root cause of the fluid buildup and the inflammation. Thanks.
Absolutely. Let's switch to a different technology. Lloyd, as we think about vision loss, are you also including surgical med devices with microchips and to overcome vision loss? Is this a reality? What are you working on?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Actually, it is. I kind of feel like the odd person out. I'm the only, I guess, device person on the panel. In ophthalmology, a lot of money being poured into drug development. We actually have a bit of a different approach. If you look at retinal degenerative disease, the dry form of AMD is by far the largest, I'd say, global prevalent health problem when you think about retinal degenerative disease. And when I talk about retinal degenerative disease, I put sort of 3 main diseases in that category. AMD, so the dry form of AMD, because that's a neurodegenerative process. Stargardt's disease and retinitis pigmentosa. Those are sort of the 3, I'd say, most prevalent, with dry AMD being the most. And we know that, the population is aging. This is a disease of the aging. And it used to be, I'd say, 30, 40 years ago, that when people progressed and they got older, they would say, well, I'm just losing vision. My eyesight's getting worse. That's just a normal process of aging. And we know that over time, the more that we've learned about the neurodegenerative process of especially the dry form of AMD, we realize that there was a real need in the market to try to address the disease. And I think there were 65 different ongoing trials, mostly in the drug field, that looked at trying to intervene in the earlier stage of the disease to try to stop the progression of the disease. In many ways, I'd say similar to sort of anti-VEGF treatments for the wet form of AMD. And many trials have shown some initial early success in drugs, and then they would either fail in 2B or phase 3. So our approach is quite different. We say that a certain percentage of the population will progress to blindness, regardless of what we do for them. Two recent publications back about a year ago, meta-analysis done, shows that the advanced form of AMD, which is the form that actually leads to blindness, was largely underreported in the general population. And in fact, it used to be thought, at least the general consensus was, that roughly 1% of AMD patients actually were in the advanced form or had geographic atrophy. And now actually, the general understanding is it can be as high as 5%. So we know the disease is getting larger, the population is getting larger. So we say when patients progress to blindness, we actually will restore some amount of useful vision. And at Pixium, and again, I also want to mention, and thanks, Mina, you said this before, we are also a publicly traded company. So I want you to also be cognizant of any forward-looking statements. But what I'll share is public information. We've actually now issued 2 publications, one in ophthalmology in 2019, the other in Nature a few months ago, where we actually showed in a phase 2 study the ability to actually restore some level of central visual acuity in patients by where they actually could read. And so when I say read, I mean up to a size 8 font on a computer screen. And these are patients that had visual acuity of 2400 or worse. So they were considered legally blind. And without our system, they were not able to actually read or see faces or anything of that nature. And maybe the last point that I want to mention about our technology, while it is an implant, so it is a medical device, it is a minimally invasive implantation. Remember, in the dry AMD population, these are older people, so some of them are actually have comorbidities and are clinically compromised. So we actually can do the procedure under local anesthesia if need be. And after 4 weeks post-implantation and the retina heals, they come back for a rehabilitation session and training. They learn how to use the device. And more importantly, they learn how to centralize their gaze and then start to use their central vision, which they haven't used for quite some time. We've demonstrated the ability to read, like I said, up to a size 8 font, to see letters, read small sentences, and even identify for instance, the time that a train is leaving a certain station, the destination it's heading. So what we're trying to do with our technology is restore a level of independence and improve quality of life. So I'm here to say that it is, while the technology, if you look into it, seems quite science fiction-esque and Star Trek-y, it is a reality. We are now entering our final pivotal study in Europe, and we'll be applying for CE mark sometime at the end of 2022, early 2023. So we're very excited about the technology, and the name of the technology is Prima, just for the audience to know. So hope that answers your question, Laura.
Absolutely amazing, right? It gives us hope as we get older, and saying that we're not gonna miss seeing that computer screen. So amazing results. So, Carrie, what are you thinking about as far as trends driving innovation and some of the new technology that you've been thinking about, as you forward your company?
Sure, and I'm a self-identifying nerd, so this area is just wonderful with the degree of innovation that's going on. As we step and look back or look forward to our company and our product, and what is the world going to look like in 5 or so years from now? And it's really quite stunning, some of the advances that are already here. For example, in detecting early disease or any sort of retinal disease, AI diagnostic was actually the first FDA-approved diagnostic. So this is really important because, particularly in, for example, diabetic retinopathy, we know that only about 1/6 of the number of patients who receive their screenings get it. And one of the challenges with that is you need to normally go to your ophthalmologist, or if you've got more a disease progressing, you have to go to your retinal surgeon. And so accessibility to screening has been a barrier. Also, too, you need experts to read what's coming in and grade it, etc. So through the development now of machine learning and artificial intelligence, they can diagnose remotely disease in patients and identify who needs to have an intervention, how they're responding, and what to do to follow the patient through. But it goes even further than that. So when the first AI diagnosis was brought on board, the machines were still really big machines that were very expensive and primarily in specialist offices. Now, through advances in the technology, they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. There's actually ones you can do taking a picture from a smartphone. And so that's totally revolutionizing the ability to intervene and identify patients. So now, for example, a diabetic patient can be screened actually even now at their general practitioner's office as part of their annual checkup. They can screen their eyes and get a diagnosis, and then determine, do they need to be sent on to a retinal specialist for care, or can they hopefully in the future have a non-invasive intervention such as the OTT 166 eye drop that they can start using in their disease to improve their retinal health now, but also prevent the progression of the disease. So that's a big technology change in the area as well. I think the other area, perhaps more broadly, is that through the use of these more sophisticated scanning and screening techniques, we can see deeper and deeper and deeper into what's going on inside the back of the eye. And so we can track more closely and develop some ways to even predict which patients are more likely to rapidly progress, or ones that are sort of have a phenotype that may more slowly progress. So as we get more and more information in this area, again, being able to stratify and change the patient journey, as well as opening up and bringing more patients in to be able to be treated earlier, so they don't end up at the losing vision, from their retinal disease.
Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, as I think back of the many deals that I've been part of, from both the buy and the sell, and also knowing that we've got both investors and pharma partners on the line today, and thinking about the commercial landscape in ophthalmology, it's becoming very competitive. But as we just heard, it's also expanding substantially. As investors or even strategic partners are thinking about, should they view the risk-reward profile? And would this differ and vary with indication, with any of the clinical trial requirements, competition for patient? I think I'm going to start with Jeff, go to Mina, but then I think we'll just do a round. I think everyone has probably got some input on this one. So why don't we start with Jeff, and then I'll flip to the others to make sure we have a good discussion around this, because I think this is a very important discussion. Jeff?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about it, it's really about trade-offs. So when you're thinking about, as a physician, what do you want to prescribe for this patient? You really have to think about, okay, what am I trading off? If I have something that's not as efficacious or has a different safety profile, will I really trade that off for convenience? And what level of convenience will I trade it off for? And I think that's really where a lot of the market research is coming into play now, where people are studying that, understanding that there are certain populations, both in retinal disease and in anterior and posterior disease, where there really is an unmet medical need on convenience, but people don't want to trade off efficacy or safety. And so for us in our company, we're actually going head to head against Eylea, for example, in wet AMD next year, because we really feel like we need to prove not only to ourselves, but I think to the investors and to the market that our drug is not different in terms of safety and efficacy, but it does have a significant advantage on convenience. And so I think that's, as we think about taking all these novel approaches to the clinic, we really have to think about what's the commercial opportunity, what's going to be the return, and no one thing is going to be able to take the entire market. I think that's often a misconception that people have. And we've done a lot of market research in my past companies, and really even with the best technologies and the best approaches, you're always not going to have 100% of the market. So I think we have to look at it as what fraction of the market will we capture, and how long will it take us to get there? How much investment will it take to get to that endpoint? How large are the studies going to need to be? Who are we going to compete with to get those patients for those studies? Because as you just mentioned, it's very competitive right now for clinical trials, especially in certain indications. And so we really need to take that whole picture into context as we present that to investors and we think about our own internal portfolios.
Yeah, absolutely. Patient choice is so important. So that's exciting to hear that we're leaning in towards that. Mina, I know that you've actually been thinking a lot about this too, around partnering and other indications. Love to hear your thoughts around this as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Laura. And just building on what Jeff said, I'll take more of the strategic partner view and sort of what we've seen in the landscape over the last couple of years and as we look ahead. So I'd comment once that the deal activity in ophthalmology was pretty hot and heavy a few years ago. We saw, Encore get bought by Novartis for a phase 2 program with just over 50 patients with more milestones and royalties to make probably $1 billion deal. And that was the upfront. We saw, Novartis a few years ago pick up Xiidra for 10 times revenue multiple. So $4 billion on about $400 million of annual trailing sales. And then we've seen some other gene therapy plays, of course, in terms of Spark and Nightstar and other deals, as well as collaborations around the world. A lot of China deals of late as well for ophthalmology, ranging from small upfronts to hundreds of millions in value in biobuck deals. So I think there's the activity was sort of strong a few years ago. There's a little bit of quietness, I think, during COVID year last year, but I think we're seeing it pick back up again as we look forward into 2021 and beyond. And mostly because, for good or bad, there's been some failures at the large pharma as it relates to some of their retinal programs. And as a result, there's sort of a big gap, whether it be for wet AMD, dry AMD, diabetic retinopathy, et cetera. And so that really gives an opportunity for those of us that are innovating to maybe have something that will help fill that pipeline, because retina remains the largest therapeutic sales area for the industry. Obviously, there's the device side as well and surgical equipment, but ultimately on the therapeutic side, it's always been the retina. And I'd contrast that and say that on the front of the eye, though, what we've noticed, especially with the emergence of dry eye and a lot of activity and new players coming with some solutions on the dry eye, some new indications like blepharitis, which should maybe be a year or two away from filing. We're working on reversal of mydriasis, which we're going to file our NDA next year and provide another front of the eye option, as well as presbyopia, which I'll talk about in a little bit later. But these are all new hot areas that could also be hundreds of millions to $1 billion in revenue, which of course then puts it sort of in the stratosphere of interest for the large and medium pharma. So I think it's going to be a fun and active deal making as we look ahead, because of the pipeline gaps and strategic areas of the front of the eye that also need to be commercialized by the large pharma. So I'm excited for all of us. And, I know there's been a lot of consolidation across pharma, but I think it's settling, and we kind of know, I think they have their strategic direction. We'll see a lot of good things come from those large ophthalmic players. I'd also make one other comment. We've also seen the device side, whether that's Alcon, Glocos, or J&J Vision, enter the pharma field, maybe starting in the gene therapy space with the dip. But I think, as you see, that's a little bit riskier, a little longer term, and you've got lots of other opportunities for front or back of the eye, maybe front more often for them. So again, I think we're going to see some new entrants as well on the therapeutic side. So it's going to be exciting for more drugs with capital behind them, commercial footprints that are global, to really get this to all around the world, because everything we're working on is not a US-centric disease. It is truly all of us face these aging issues, and we want our eyesight to be perfect. So.
Wow, absolutely. Lots of ophthalmology innovation, investment, or strategic partnerships. Carrie and Lloyd, anything else to add along this discussion?
Yes, I'd like to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. I think some really important things to add to the points, excellent points that Mina and Jeff made. And, what we have reviewed and seen from our interactions and lots of interest from pharma partners and from investors is what drives it is having a truly differentiated product going forward, and, looking at new mechanisms of action, et cetera. But as we all know, not only in ophthalmology, but in all of our drug development, regulatory success is necessary but not sufficient with that. And also having a true value story to get that sort of reimbursement for the molecule going forward. So it has to deliver true clinical value in addition to, meeting the regulatory approvals going forward. I'd also say, part of what was driving the quieter year last year with regards to mergers and acquisitions was the appetite in the public markets for investment. It was a bumper year. It was over $2 billion through IPOs and follow-on offerings. And so those companies who are developing programs have the opportunity to build further value before considering an acquisition or a partnership. And a number of them are planning to actually commercialize themselves. Ophthalmology is a relatively small specialist space and can be addressed by, a modest size sales force and marketing campaign. So there's some factors in there which I think, there is some pressure on pharma companies to be able to be competitive to acquire promising molecules and programs for their pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Regulatory approval is not just enough. We also have to have the commercial strategy to become a viable product out in the marketplace. I think lots of good insights there. Lloyd, I'll flip it over to you and see if you have anything else to add as far as investment strategic partners. This is such an important topic. I wanted to have everybody kind of dig a little deep on this one.
Yeah, thanks. I think I maybe just add a couple of other points. You know, interesting during COVID, the profile of investors that actually started to come forward and look at investing in higher risk technologies. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I think over the last 18 months, we publicly announced that we've probably raised over 25 million euro because we're a French-based company. And the most recent raise we did was actually with generalist investors out of the US. And the reason that I'm bringing this forward particularly is, we're a pre-commercial med device company in the final phase of development pre-approval. And I would say maybe as late as 2.5 or 3 years ago, we would have never been an attractive investment for sort of generalist US investors. We just don't fit the typical DNA of what they would invest in. But I do think, sort of rebounding on what Carrie said and some of the others, the situation was such over the last maybe 18 months that there was so much volatility and activity and so much interest and focus in COVID-related development that a lot of the life science specialist investors were all kind of like kids chasing after a soccer ball. They were all running there. And then that left this vacuum and really opportunity for companies like us and also generous investors to come in and invest. So maybe that's the first point I'd mention. The second, on the regulatory front, while it's true that regulatory approval is not enough, I will, in fact, add that the changing regulatory landscape, and what I mean by that is in Europe, the change from MDD to the MDR regulations have made it more complicated to get approval in Europe. It used to be years ago, when I was coming up through med device, you would get approvals in Europe first because it was easier, and then the US would follow. I can tell you, living it for the last 18 months, that has completely changed. And for a while, we actually thought, well, maybe regulatory approval in the US would be the smart way to go. But then when COVID hit, the agency was really only adjudicating dossiers associated with COVID-related matters. So it kind of made it a bit difficult. How does this relate to the investment side? Is that the regulatory processes have become more expensive and lengthy. And so what I would say to investors and to my fellow sort of CEOs on the phone is one thing, or on the video chat here, is one thing we cannot do is underestimate the capital need. It's only going to get more intensive. And so thank goodness there are other investor profile out there that are willing to make the investment here in light of this vacuum. And then the third point I would make was I'll rebound off the comment that Mina made about Asia and China. And I can tell you that probably over the last 12 months, we've seen a tremendous amount of interest and an aggressive interest from potential Chinese companies for M&A and investment. And while the world is sort of focusing on investing in COVID type developments, I think the Chinese have realized that other types of technologies in the life science space need to go forward. And so maybe this is an opportunity for them to sort of get involved. So sort of those are sort of my three key takeaways.
Yeah. Carrie, would you like something to add?
Yeah, Lloyd just sort of sparked a thought there, and further to comment to investors in particular, that, we're hearing that, so much money and so is going into, for example, oncology and rare disease. It's actually getting very difficult to get into investments there. It's actually, what is that, 1,600 oncology programs in the clinic, and obviously many, many more in development. So, some of the investors, smarter investors, we would think, are saying, look, what is another market opportunity for us that provides chronic disease, heavily, in a high level of unmet need, is, specialist driven, and is not as crowded going forward. So I think that is part of what was driving what we saw last year, particularly with the public markets, and what we're still continuing to see here in this year, particularly more on the private side, with investing in opportunities to help investors diversify their portfolio as well. So I think that's an important factor.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to what Lloyd and Mina both said. I think what's important to recognize is we've done some market research in China and also in India. And I think in both of those territories, the ratio of patients to retinal ophthalmologists, especially for retinal disease or diabetic retinopathy, is dramatically higher than the United States. So there's enormous numbers of the population that are just not being treated. And it's really devastating, especially if it's early in the life of a person, 30s or 40s with diabetes. So we've really learned that there's a strong interest in those territories to have a more convenient profile of a product that could be distributed widely to the population. And so we've started to think about how we can integrate clinical sites early in the clinical program in those territories so that we have exposure to the regulatory authorities in those areas. And we can start to think about, partnerships once we have clinical data that supports the convenience and the efficacy and safety of the profile. And then the other thing I'll say is that in some of those territories, and especially in India, what we've learned is that we have to come up with a different commercial strategy there. And it's more of a tiered pricing strategy in some of these territories where you have to think about how can you push this out to the entire population, really treat the unmet medical need while still maintaining some reasonable profit margin where people can't afford to pay what they pay for like Lucentis and Eylea. We really need to get it down to a way that we can get it out to the whole population in those territories. So those are some of the challenges as you think about drug development, I think, in our space, where that's really the emerging market opportunity, especially in India and China, where there's a huge unmet medical need.
Yeah, did you have something to add?
I was just going to make a comment a little bit in contrast to Lloyd's on regulatory, because coming from not the device side, but the drug side, I have to say that the US FDA division, of ophthalmology, the leadership there and the teams there, they have been very consistent, very accessible, and actually have been very productive in their approvals from a pharmaceutical RX perspective over the last 20 years. And so I would say I've worked in cardiovascular, I've worked in cancer, I've worked in neuro and kidney as well in my 25-year career. And this division and this area of ophthalmology on the pharma side is really shorter trials, less expensive cost per patient. And when you have clear guardrails, it allows you to develop your phase 2, your phase 3, and your NDA application without thinking it may change on you on a short notice. And so actually the cost is less relative to the other pharmaceutical categories again. But on the device side, I completely agree that I think the bar might be moving up a bit. And I think some of the lower cost pathways previously available to the device industry in Europe or US have been risen. And I think that's good, because at the end of the day, we're talking about treatment options, whether they be pharmaceuticals, whether they be devices or surgical interventions by the doctors themselves, all need to be highly regulated so we can have the safest and most effective therapies. So I just wanted to sort of contrast that. Actually, I would argue that this regulatory environment for ophthalmology is by far the best I've ever seen across the many diseases I've worked in. I bet Carrie's probably nodding her head as well, given her experiences, and Jeff is also nodding his head. We've worked in oncology, we've worked in rare diseases, we've worked in cardiovascular. And then the second comment, just a little bit different that I just want to add in the big picture for investors. This is an area where 20 years ago, there really wasn't pharmaceutical or therapeutic interventions, but we're always the first. So the eye was the first with an antisense. People won't remember that, but ISIS or Ionis had one in 1998 approved. It wasn't used, but it was the first. Gene therapy, Spark, was the first. Many of the procedures, first here. So for presbyopia, working on an eye drop, that's going to be a first. So I think that this is a field, oral tablets as well as eye drops for retina. It really is because of the local nature of the eye. And I think that the community of retinal specialists, ophthalmologists, and optometrists, they embrace innovation. They look at how it adds to their business, brings more patients in. And so I think, again, it's really a community that's fun to work in. So, and develop drugs and innovation here.
So fantastic conversation. I'm going to switch the conversation a little bit to continue the conversation where Jeff was going a moment ago around commercialization. We have both our investors and our pharma colleagues on the line right now. And as they're thinking through this, they want to know what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What's the revenue maximization model that we're going to be able to get? Should we do partnerships or invest in these ophthalmology innovation? So I think I'll start with Lloyd here, and then I think this is another one that we'll just have everyone comment on as well. Lloyd?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so with respect to ophthalmology, it's interesting because I heard the comment before that it's becoming very fragmented, but actually, on one hand, that's true. On the other hand, I actually think that could be quite beneficial. And let me explain what I mean by that. If we're focusing, and I'm speaking from our perspective, on back of the eye retinal degenerative disease, when we look at ophthalmology and retina, as compared to other markets that I'm quite familiar with, and I'll contrast it with orthopedics, let's just say. In orthopedics, when you develop a technology, it requires a very vast commercial infrastructure. You're fighting for 1% market share. You're fighting against the top 5 in the world. And the patient population is spread across every hospital system there is, in every country. So that becomes actually, in many ways, a very complex, expensive commercial model that would really push you, I think, towards partnership, because trying to break into that market segment becomes complicated, expensive. There are already hospital contracts in place, government contracts in place. So you kind of want to partner. With respect to what we're doing in the retinal space in dry AMD, essentially the patient population that's currently being seen by specialists, and granted that might only be 70% of those that suffer from the disease, because many of them don't even seek care because there's nothing you can really do for them, so they just kind of resolve themselves to going sort of blind. But those that are actually under the care of specialists, the specialists are quite concentrated. They are situated around major centers. And so when we think about commercialization for us, that fragmentation in the market we think is quite beneficial. Because why? You can easily identify and target the specialists that capture the patient. You can develop a specialty sales organization to ensure that you get the best clinical outcome, because that's ultimately what you want, especially when you're developing and launching a new technology. You can't afford to have poor clinical outcomes because it'll never, be adopted. And then prove that you have, with a very targeted strategy, I think, good penetration in the markets that you're focusing on. And then I believe that over time, as you ensure good clinical outcomes, that you've targeted the right centers, that you've partnered with the right specialists, then that might in fact warrant then either a hybrid model or a partnership strategy, where you then would depend on a much larger organization to sort of expand and increase adoption across a broader geographical space. So when I think of compare and contrast, ophthalmology more fragmented, but I think that's also beneficial at first when you're talking about novel disruptive technology innovation.
Wonderful. Carrie?
Yes. So I think, again, looking forward, 5+ years in terms of what the market is going to look like then, and I think there are going to be opportunities to consider what makes the best sense for your particular product, whether you do choose to partner or go alone, or et cetera. We've seen during COVID, for example, rapid adoption of telemedicine with that. So the patient journey starts to change very much. As well, even in the retina field, we saw the telemedicine. You could see that because of some of these remote diagnostic things that were available, a patient could just go to their local, a general practice clinic, get seen, and have the materials and things sent for examination and review at their center without having to go in. So, our challenge is coming up with therapies that can match that patient journey. And that's going to change over time with that. It may be that you could do this in a different model to a traditional sales force, for example. It could be done as a different model, not necessarily requiring you to partner with a larger pharma. But pharma is evolving as well, and their abilities to reach the market and taking that forward. So I think it really does depend on the type of technology you're developing. Something that Lloyd is talking about, where you need a specialist to actually physically do something. There's some interventional procedures, a very different segment to the newer segment of the market that we see evolving with non-invasive therapies. So it'll be fascinating to see how that turns out. I think in the meantime, we'll be focusing on developing our programs to the clinic so we can get to be in a position to have to make that choice.
Wonderful. Jeff, return on investment, what partnership, what direction, what insight?
Well, one of the things I think that we haven't covered that I think is important that none of us have touched on is reimbursement. So I think when you go out there and you think about commercialization, one piece of it we've already touched on is the market opportunity, but we haven't touched on the payers. And I think, and also the physicians and how they actually benefit by having a more expensive drug because they get ASP plus 6 or 8%. And so I've run across that in my previous jobs where, how do you get into that market? Because they're de-incentivized to use a cheaper product, even if it's equally efficacious, because that cheaper product doesn't get them as much revenue, right? So I think we have to really think about reimbursement, payers, and then how the community is going to look at the products that we're developing, because if we're really going to change the paradigm, as some of the panelists have said, and go maybe to certain subsets of physicians, or even go broader to other physicians that don't typically treat retinal disease and get them to write the scripts, we really have to think about how we can do that through the payers, get the reimbursement that we need, and then commercialize based off of that. And I think when you start to talk to pharma, you can't just talk about market segments. You really have to start talking about how the payers are going to perceive this and how the KOLs are going to perceive this as either a threat or be supportive. And so it's a bigger picture than just looking at a market research analysis. It's really broader: reimbursement, physician uptake. So that's, if you're a pharma, that's what you're thinking. And that's what we need to think as small companies.
Couldn't agree more, Jeff. I think we're definitely in the world of needing predictive reimbursement and access and physician adoption, right, of these new technologies with our stakeholders, right? I think it's so critical. Right. Nina, I will let you have the last word, and then we're going to open it up for question and answers.
Great. Yeah. So I think the topic was commercialization that we were talking about. And I just want to make a comment for us that we're kind of in a unique position to start thinking about commercialization, given our positive phase 3 data on the reversal of dilation with Nixol. So we're working through the final manufacturing components. We've got, again, our guidance from the FDA from last year, and we're looking at commercial partners, and we're looking at all the options, go it alone, finding a channel partner, to maybe partnering with large pharma. Now that's both in the US as well as outside the US, doing, of course, the additional trial that would be needed outside the US. So I just want to say, as a small company that's public with the access to capital, but also the tight-knit community, it really is you get the options, which isn't, again, the case for all pharmaceutical drug development. But really the point I wanted to make about commercialization, I'm going to take the private pay side of things, right? The ophthalmic field has really flourished because people have been paying out of pocket, whether it was from LASIK, 20 years ago, myself included, $6,000 out of pocket, $3,000 for each eye, to, the multifocal IOL lenses or the premiums, to other procedures and add-ons when you're at the doctor's office. So I think that this physician community has learned how to create the cash pay and the revenue model across their practices, in addition, of course, to reimbursement where it is. But I think what's interesting, and I'll just use presbyopia because, again, we just came off of ASCRS and Eye Accelerator, where presbyopia was sort of one of the next frontiers, or the final frontier, at least for the refractive areas. And thinking about commercialization for presbyopia is kind of an important topic right now for the community. I think the clinicians, the industry players, which there's at least 6 or so, including ourselves in late stage, led by Allergan, is we're thinking through, led by Allergan, sort of how to build the market. So this will be a new market for prescription eye drops, where it will be private pay, or at least that's the sense we'll all have, that we're all willing to pay on a monthly basis for that convenience and option, safety and efficacy. And, I think having a leader like Allergan, I just want to put a shout out to them. They built Botox, a private pay, new markets, now 19 indications, I think if my math is correct, including neurology. And so we're really excited to have leaders in our space that can build and commercialize new markets, especially when it's private pay, and really build that awareness, because that's what it'll take. And then I think there's room for many players. There's 120 million presbyopes. It's basically every one of us after we turn about 45 years of age, unless you're one of the few lucky ones that don't need it. So thinking about global commercialization as well as U.S. commercialization. And again, we need the community and the partners to be also working alongside the smaller innovative companies as we build this. But again, what's nice about commercialization in ophthalmology is it's actually well received by the physicians, because there's always ways for them to see how it can build their revenue. And again, having leaders in the space that are really good with the consumer and other awareness building with the KOLs and the physician community helps the rest of the community have a spot when we're ready to commercialize. So I just really want to say that it's a nice spectrum, and that we don't always have to do it alone, and that the investment community should realize that we can really leverage the work of the other players. And so again, it's a good time for our community to be thinking about private pay and reimbursement, and each time figuring out what's the right answer. But I think ophthalmology, private pay will continue to be an area of growth for income for the pharma partners, industry players like ourselves, and or the physicians as well.
Wow, I'm in awe. This amazing leadership, amazing discussion. I think what we'll do now is I'll turn it back over to Sarah and we can start the question and answers.
Yeah, I think you've covered some of the questions that have actually come in. The very first one I was going to start off with was, what will reimbursement look like? And then, I think you've answered that, for the most part. And a second part to that question is, will your, and this is for you, Mina, will your therapeutic be available in the developing world where glasses are very hard to come by?
Yeah, so
I mean, is that a leap that you're making at this point?
Yeah, so I would just say that, again, Allergan is leading the field, for example, in presbyopia. They filed their NDA in February. Their PDUFA date should be in December. So it would be on the market, eye drops, in lieu of glasses next year, of course, US initially. But you can imagine, again, that they will lead the way not only into the other developed countries and markets, but also the developing countries. And I think, the smaller players, mid-sized players like ourselves can then follow in those footsteps. I think the nice thing about eye drop is they're relatively inexpensive. Then these are all small molecules and they have fairly low cost of goods sold. So I think you can start to see an opportunity for appropriate pricing in appropriate markets. But just like oral tablets or eye drops for the retina, to get access in those developing and developed countries is so necessary because there aren't enough doctors to do the procedures. I think the same would be here, that eye drops that you can take at home on your own would really open up all markets to innovations. But again, I think it will be like all drug development. It's sort of a gradual process, US, other developed countries, and then the developing countries, unless Bill Gates Foundation and others, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, others take their stand instead of just doing infectious disease and some other diseases, take on ophthalmology, then I think you could actually see it get there faster. So.
Yeah, one of our questioners wants to know who is interacting with small foundations and large foundations at this point. Anybody? Lloyd, you are.
Yeah. So, one thing that we've done a little bit in the U.S. with Foundation Fighting Blindness, but I'd say mostly in Europe where we are headquartered, we've partnered with a lot of patient advocacy groups, which actually are fairly well funded in really trying to understand from our perspective the patient need. When you think about, and this goes back to reimbursement, by the way, a lot of the government agencies in Europe that are responsible for payment, or CMS in the US, more and more payment is being, and reimbursement is being determined on patient-centered outcomes. And so it's really important as you go through your development phase to better understand, what does the patient want? What does the patient expect out of their treatment or therapy? And many times as companies and as developers, we think we know, but you'd be surprised how many times we don't get it exactly right. And so one thing that we've done is, we've partnered very closely with patient advocacy groups and foundations, blindness foundations in the UK, France, Spain, Italy, and the US to really better understand more the patient requirement and patient need. At this point, we haven't taken any investment money from them, but we've in fact ourselves made some investments in those and contributions to those groups as well. So we have quite a bit of close contact with them, I'd say.
Yeah, that's great, Lloyd. Yeah, I'm just thinking, think about all the children in the world who really need glasses in order to go to school. How do we do that? How do we support that? So for the panel, one of our questioners notes that there are a number of diseases that are detectable through the eye. What are your thoughts about the accuracy and dependability, for instance, of detecting Alzheimer's or other neurodegenerative diseases through the eye? Anybody?
Well, I'll take it, but I can't answer the question, nor I don't think any of us can yet. That would be its own startup company right there, by the way. So if we have that innovation.
There may be one out there. There may be
one.
one.
But I was going to say that one thing about diagnostics, whether for the eye or in the blood, the diagnostic field, it is important, but I had a philosophy as a VC as well for a long time before being an entrepreneur in this CEO side is you only want to have a diagnostic if you have a treatment. So knowing something, and whether you're the patient or the doctor, and not being able to treat it is very frustrating and also unproductive. So I'm not saying that there won't be great diagnostics that may uncover new things, but I'd love when the diagnostics line up with treatment options that might already exist or are up and coming. And when you can combine RX and DX together, DX and RX together, you can really create some, phenomenal impact on patients, such as, the HER2 in the breast cancer field 15, 20 years ago, and some other examples today. And I would just come back to the foundations, like the Keratoconus Foundation is very active as well, and that's for refractive front of the eye. They struggle with night vision and general vision all, their whole life, and they're very active. And I would just say, so if you can earlier detect a keratoconus patient, you might be able to start some treatment. So that might be a more practical example. But I do think the eye is the window to many diseases. So right. I do think that I don't think what you said is Star Trek. I think there probably are some options and opportunities to detect other diseases which are treatable through the eye. And hopefully the imaging technologies in our field will continue to provide some trials to help showcase some of that, statistical analysis, not just anecdotal data. So.
Right. Yeah. One of what we're planning, as you know, for BioFuture, and one of the groups that we're talking to is looking at using AI to diagnose neurodegenerative disease through the eye. So this question just happened to be really, really quite appropriate. Question for everybody. Are there any exciting developments in the pediatric field that you would like to mention?
I can comment on that.
Go ahead, Carrie. Did you?
Yeah, I'd comment on that. And one of the areas we've not talked about, because we're not actually active in that in our companies, but is there's actually an epidemic of myopia, severe short-sightedness that is developing it amongst kids. And particularly in China and in Asia, this is a major problem. Now, I wear glasses. I was diagnosed, 5 or 6 years old. Okay, you get glasses and you take it for granted that every year your eyes progress. You just have to get stronger and stronger glasses until you sort of stop at that 20. Well, in fact, they know that if they can start treating with eye drops here for earlier on, you can stop or slow down the progression to particularly severe myopia, very, very severe short-sightedness, but you have to intervene early with that. And you think, well, okay, I'll have to wear glasses. What's the big deal? I can get LASIK. I've learned that severe short-sightedness actually drives some major problems, retinal problems. You can get retinal detachment. You imagine the muscles in the eyes having to pull all the time to focus. So that's a big area in pediatrics that have a number of really interesting active trials going on now. So there's some interesting data starting to come out. So I think that'll be making a big difference. So imagine liquid glasses, for kids.
Yeah.
For pediatrics, that's a very interesting area. The other one is in gene therapies, the inherited retinal diseases. And this is where particularly the Foundation Fighting Blindness is very active, involved in funding clinical development to stop, the almost inevitable progression to severe vision loss, going forward. So the first gene therapy approved, one of the very first ones, was Luxturna for an inherited form of retinal blindness. And there are some other exciting things going on more in the rare pediatric disease space. So lots going on. At the other end of the spectrum, we've talked about the age-related, population age-related macular degeneration, older people with diabetes. We're talking about people in the middle who are suddenly having to wear reading glasses. And we're also talking about this younger generation where we can intervene earlier and do things to improve their lifelong visual health.
Actually, sorry, just maybe... maybe one other comment. I know that, and maybe it's not directly related to the work that we're doing, but when you think about children and screen time. That's the big problem. People, they're in front of computer screens and phones all the time. I know there have been quite a bit of development work, I know, coming out of Silicon Valley and other places where they're actually looking at televisions and screens that help filter out, different color patterns and things, because the thought is that screens are here to stay, and we're going to be, as much as you try as a parent, I know, to sort of fight screen time, you never win that battle. And so the thought is, kids are going to be looking at screens. It's going to be causing all kinds of visual problems. And so maybe the manufacturers, the Sonys of the world, the Panasonics and others, and the computer companies are looking at ways to sort of create screens that are more less nocive, more friendly to those that are looking at them 8 and 10 hours a day. So, not med device and biopharma, but, general consumer products also, I think. Yeah.
You can buy one of those on Amazon.
Yeah, exactly.
The blue light filters, I put them on my kids' screens already.
Yeah, Sarah, I was just going to build on what Carrie said. I was going to actually say childhood myopia is definitely the one topic we didn't cover. So she did a great job in describing it. Although I would say that there's a practical solution in addition to these 3 programs that are in late stage trials that have a 3-year endpoint, which is go outside for 1 hour, have your kids go outside for 1 hour. There's some literature and papers that suggest that that's another way to maybe offset some of that progression. But all of this is around lifestyle, right? We're all getting accustomed to this different lifestyle than we would have had even just 30, 40 years ago when we were younger. And I think it will just build and get worse. And so we need eye care treatment options because people are not willing to change their lifestyle, which I think is really where the unmet needs will just continue. In addition to the diabetic phenomena, which is just going to explode the DR and the DME issues. But the only other area on the retina that I didn't hear us talk about, which is exciting, and there's some data coming, I think, later this year and next year from a couple biotech players, is geographic atrophy, which is sort of the end of the game.
Geographic atrophy. Explain.
It's sort of that last leg untreatable after you've had AMD. So and for surgeons to potentially now have a new injection option if these products have good phase 3 data will actually keep the retinal docs really busy, which will actually give them time to adopt ours, Carrie's, or others products, which will be oral or intrapreneal or an eye drop. So I think the key is that our eyes are the window to the world, and we just need and want and will pay for the best as long as, we're active, which we all want to be into our 80s at this point. So I think there's just so much promise for ophthalmology across the field. So,
anybody else want to jump in and comment?
I'll add another comment as well. It's interesting, hearing some of the discussions in, some of the panels at these scientific meetings, and they're, talking about, getting a cataract lens replacement. With that, and it's like it's not if, it's when. But then discussions that saying it's almost like people are seeing this as a form of rejuvenation. It's like, oh, I can get my sight back and be younger again. And they're sort of back to some of the comments about willing to pay out of pocket for the more advanced types of lenses. It's almost akin to
instead of Botox for the skin. It's
exactly that part of the same thing and part of the same model. We want to hang on to our youth, and we want to hang on to our sight in particular. It's fascinating.
Yeah, the need. I just think about myself going back to being a 4-year-old who had to wear glasses.
Yes,
and what that was like. Carrie, you may know. I see you wearing glasses. I don't know if anybody has gone through it. And when I think about people that are not in the developed world, how did those children learn? It's challenging. We need to help. So I have a couple of other comments that have come in. One of them is from a venture company that said, great to see 2 female CEOs on this panel. We love the diversity. So that was one comment. Another one has come in, again, from another financial group, that Novi and Amadeus both diagnosed have ocular markers for CNS in the eye.
There you go.
So that's interesting. Another questioner has asked, does the FDA accept Bayesian design in ophthalmology? Are there any precedents for it?
I can comment on that. And, one of the things about coming into ophthalmology from having worked in other therapeutic areas is that you can challenge and question the way things are done. Most of the trials in ophthalmology tend to be more straightforward design, not the Bayesian, adaptive design approach and things like that. There is the opportunity for more of this to be done going forward. There has been some. And hopefully that it will continue to grow because, it can be used for more efficient design and use of clinical trial participants and volunteers. Here, you don't want to unnecessarily put someone in a trial, if you can avoid that to go forward.
And actually, on the device side, for sure, it's used. I mean, I can attest to the fact that adaptive design is used in device ophthalmology trials. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I think my experience with negotiating with Wiley Chambers at FDA is pretty consistent that they will accept that. You just have to recognize that if you're going to be innovative like that there's going to be statistical hits to doing that. And then you're going to have to do a larger study. So it may not be faster or cheaper than just doing what Wiley tells you to do in the first place. Keep that in mind.
I think we're all students and we all know to listen to the teacher here. So
yeah.
So another question's come in. When are you going to come up with the treatment for farsightedness? Mina, so I think that might be.
Well, I think the answer is the childhood myopia. Farsightedness. Presbyopia is the eye drops that I was chatting about earlier, and our development work is that we actually just had our positive phase 2 data. We'll start phase 3s next year. We'll file the NDA the year after. But Allergan's leading the way and should have drops for patients next year. And maybe one or two players may also be ahead of us and come to market between that intervening time. But it is bigger than the statin market. Eye drops, instead of these reading glasses, which I do have. By the way, sorry, I'm a LASIK patient, so that was the difference between why you didn't see me wear glasses otherwise. But these reading glasses are always right here. And so it's a really exciting time for those folks that can no longer see near as they're aging, to have more options. There are some surgical options, but that invasive approach, especially because a lot of the population that needs to start wearing reading glasses have never worn glasses before. Their reluctance to go under the knife in lieu of the reading glasses is very high, the reluctance. So eye drops are really nice for that segment of the market. And I think Carrie did a nice job talking about childhood myopia for those that can't see far, just keeping the English, easy for everyone in the audience. I know we like to use big words and in ophthalmology, so just keeping it simple. But there is nothing for that intervening years between when you're a young child and you're about 25, because LASIK, which is a great option for not being able to see far, is, they wait till your eyes are fully developed and you can't be growing any longer. So there is a little bit of a gap where the teenagers will still need to wear glasses, but hopefully at a lighter correction because of maybe some other interventions that they had. So anyway.
Okay, we need to wrap up, but an interesting question just came in, and this is for Lloyd. Lloyd, if you can say yes or no, that would be great. Does your device work with smartphones? Yes or no?
Yes, anything you need to read.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is to ask each one of you to do a really, really brief, because we're on the quarter hour, just a comment about your space and the promise of your space. So Lloyd, you're up on screen right now, so you go first.
Yep. Only thing I can say is dry AMD, advanced form of the disease, unmet clinical need, no technology or drug therapy or gene therapy currently has really shown a promise. Patients will go on to go blind. The patient population is huge, and older people, when they lose sight, it's debilitating for them. It has a huge cost in society. So we have a lot of hope for Prima in that space.
Great. Thank you so much. Karen, you're next. Really brief.
So stay tuned to see more interesting things coming from Ocuterra, and later in the year we'll be hopefully making some announcements with that. We, obviously are addressing a very large unmet need with a potentially, game-changing opportunity for earlier intervention to prevent disease progression. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. Again, very brief.
Yes. No, we're excited about what we're doing, being able to potentially treat with subcutaneous or oral administration back of the eye disease, and we think this is really going to transform the market and open up opportunities to treat patients with retinal disease, whether it's in their 30s or 40s or older patients in their 70s and 80s.
So this is so exciting. Mina, very brief.
Yes. Yep. So at Occupier, just say that we've had a lot of data catalysts, 2 positive readouts in less than 6 months. And next year we'll have some additional ones, particularly for our oral disruptive therapy for the retina. And in the meantime, we're working on filing Nixol eye drop next year off of our data, and we have more readouts. So just stay tuned for value and execution at Occupier.
Thank you. Thank you. Laura.
Well, what an amazing conversation. I think very excited about an innovation and investment, and I'm sure that this conversation piques so much interest. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to Sarah and the whole opportunity for this discussion.
Wonderful. I do want to thank you all. Before we sign off, let me officially thank all of you. So Laura, Carrie, Jeff, Lloyd, Mina, thank you so very much for joining us and participating in this really timely discussion. I'd like to thank everybody who submitted questions in the audience, and I'd like to let you know that as you sign off, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey. Please do that. And then our final note is to please join us for our next salon, which will take place September 15th, Board Readiness, How CEOs Join Corporate Boards. So until then, everybody, thank you so much for joining a Demy-Colton virtual salon. Thank you all. Enjoy your summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.